Hassan. Richard, thank you so much for joining me today. Broadly, what is your take on this? Clearly it's a political scandal, but there's much more to this as well. What is your sort of top-line thinking on this, Richard?
Yeah, I think that it's inconceivable that the British government, both the current government and the previous Conservative government, were not aware of Al-Fattah's political perspectives and of the tweets he was making and other speeches he was making as well. It's not sustainable that that was not known in London. And indeed, the Egyptians have made it clear that they informed British officials about that. One thing I would say is that I wouldn't consider it inconceivable that the civil servants, senior civil servants, did not inform the Prime Minister, but successive Prime Ministers or even Foreign Secretaries and Home Secretaries of Al-Fattah's views when they were considering the case, when they were campaigning for his release, when they were giving him British citizenship, and when they were bringing him back to the UK. I think it's possible. I don't know for sure. They may well have passed the information on. I think it's possible they didn't. And I think the reason they wouldn't have done, if that's the case, is because of their own political perspective. Now, of course, civil servants should be apolitical, but I don't believe that many of them any longer are. And it may be that they were kind of, advocates for people like Al-Fattah, irrespective of the things he was saying and irrespective of the potential damage he was going to do to the UK. And I've got some experience of this. It's not exactly the same, but in Afghanistan, when I was out there, my forces captured a number of Al-Qaeda terrorists, and civil servants in London were trying to prevent us from keeping them detained because of fears of their human rights. Not that their human rights were being breached, but potentially it would be breached. And that took precedence in their mind over the safety of British soldiers and civil and Foreign Office staff, etc., and NGO workers in Afghanistan who would have been at risk if we'd released these terrorists. So that's the sort of indication, I think, of some of the thinking among some of the civil servants, which I think potentially explains how we got to this horrific situation.
I have absolutely no reason to doubt a single word that you've said there, but there are nonetheless quite serious allegations. Somewhere along the line, no matter who has done it, we've been lied to about this is the likelihood. Certainly, you're saying it's not inconceivable that Prime Ministers, Foreign Secretaries, Home Secretaries perhaps were actually informed about these things. When Yvette Cooper says she's ordered an urgent inquiry into serious information failures that left ministers blindsided by his extremist comments, that's not credible, is it?
It's not credible that civil servants were blindsided. I think that's out of the question. It is possible, as I said, that ministers were not aware. I think it's probably unlikely, but it's certainly a possibility. It would seem to be a gross error of judgment on the part of government ministers in successive governments, as I say. I can see maybe people like you and me, etc., pointing the finger at the current governments, saying, "Yeah, well, they're hard left. They would potentially prioritise the supposed human rights of people like Al-Fattah over the safety of British citizens." I can see that, but we're talking about also a Conservative government, which I don't think quite the same.
Yeah. Well, certainly, and Priti Patel, who was often seen as one of the hardest and strongest Home Secretaries, presided over this as well. Do you think there's even more to this? Is it too conspiratorial? I don't want to get into tin-hatted theories, but could there be an intelligence element here? Could there be something in Al-Fattah actually helping us with some sort of intelligence on the enemy of our enemy, apparently being our friend? Could he have been helped because of that?
I would never exclude anything in these situations, and of course that could be a possibility. I think it's unlikely to be the case. And if it is, then this has been handled in an extremely ham-fisted way, because the efforts that British governments were making publicly and openly to have him released and brought back over here would tend to compromise his intelligence service if he was working for our intelligence organisations. And I think it would have been done in a much more subtle and very, very different way. So I wouldn't exclude that, but I think it's highly unlikely.
What should happen now?
He should have his citizenship revoked. He should be deported back to Egypt. That's what should happen. I think it's unlikely it will happen, because an attempt to revoke his citizenship is going to face legal challenge, as is indeed the potential to deport him back to Egypt is also going to face legal challenge. I don't think he's at risk necessarily if he goes back to Egypt. He was living in Egypt for a number of months after he was pardoned before he came here, and nothing happened to him, so potentially he's not at risk. So but that won't, I don't think that will deter the court from preventing his deportation. And even more significant, I think, will Al-Sisi, the president of Egypt, have him back? I would suggest the answer is absolutely not. So I think almost certainly we shouldn't be, but we're almost certainly now stuck with that.
What do you think is likely to happen? And more broadly, what do you think it says about our political system, about the civil servants, about the way we handle these issues, that this has happened and you have, you know, the music has stopped essentially, and you have a Prime Minister and a Foreign Secretary who do not have a seat?
Well, what will happen, I think, is that he will remain here. Potentially, I suspect that our security services will maintain some form of surveillance over him, given the open threats he's made against British people, against Jews, against white people, against police officers, the mothers of police officers, the children of police officers. But so they would be, I think they'd be negligent if they didn't maintain surveillance over him, which will be very, very costly. We will also no doubt be paying for his accommodation, for his welfare, for his upkeep. And this will cost millions to the British taxpayer. I have no doubt about that. As to the civil service, I do think this should highlight the reasons why there needs to be a serious review into the operation of the civil service, particularly on Home Office and Foreign Office civil servants. And there needs to be a fundamental, I think, reorganisation of the civil service. As you know, not just because of this. There are many other examples I could give you, but because of this kind of highlights above many other things the need to really do that. Will it happen? I think it's highly unlikely.
Given his very strongly anti-Semitic views, the fact that he denies the Holocaust, the fact that he says he wants to kill Zionists, and just a reminder to our viewers and listeners, a Zionist is anybody who thinks Israel has a right to exist. That's it. That's what Zionism is. Colonel Kemp, you've been to Israel many times. You've been into Gaza during the war. You've seen what is happening on the ground. You've seen what is real as opposed to the propaganda that we're told about. Given the level of anti-Semitism around the world, but particularly in this country as well, we have Mervyn Kirsch, who is a 101-year-old D-Day veteran, like you, someone who has given his life and service to this country, who says what's disappointing is the anti-Semitism that I see everywhere, hear everywhere, or read. He says he was 19 years old and was arrived in Normandy 3 days after the start of the D-Day landings. He sees it, we see it, we hear about it. Given that the government is embracing someone who is openly anti-Semitic, who I would argue is a danger to our country, how on earth can Keir Starmer say he's credible in his efforts, he says, to fight anti-Semitism in this country?
Well, it is not credible. And, you know, I know many Jews in this country, as well as in other European countries and the US, who are very, very fearful for their future. And that has particularly been intensified during the course of the Gaza war over the last 2 years, when there's been intensive demonstrations called for globalizing the Intifada, in other words, terrorist action around the world, calls for from the river to the sea, in other words, the eradication of the state of Israel. Huge hate demonstrations against Jews, all of it which have been allowed to go on. We've seen the consequence of some of that in Manchester, and we saw it in Bondi very recently. And really, I don't think there's any no Jew or non-Jew, because non-Jews should be just as concerned about this as Jews are.
Absolutely.
And none of them can have confidence that our government it has a priority of protecting them. Quite the opposite, in fact. And there are many Jews that I know who are seriously considering leaving this country. Some have already left because of this hate against Jews that is intensified.
On a recent survey by the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, okay, it's going to be a fairly select audience, but 61% of British Jews said they're considering leaving this country for Israel. So that absolutely stacks up with what you're saying. Just before you go, Richard, I just want to ask you one more question. The defence spending falling £8 billion short. Labour's been warned about that. And also Trump is saying that the US will knock the hell out of Iran if it tries to rearm. I just wonder what you make of those two aspects of defence policy and foreign policy that are around today.
Well, I think we've seen, and again, it's not just this government, we've seen in successive governments their lack of willingness to prioritise defence and put enough money into defence.
I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It's 800 billion short. Apologies, I made a mistake there.
Right. So it's a huge amount of money. And yeah, as I was saying, I think there's a very strong lack of willingness to put money into defence because they don't see it as a vote winner. Not just this government, the Conservative government as well. They didn't see it as a vote winner. They didn't put money in, despite the extraordinary growing number of threats against us from Russia, from Iran, from North Korea, from, of course, China potentially as well. So now is too late, but the time is with us that we should be putting much more resources into defence. We're not doing so, and that's you know, that really says everything you need to say about it. I think one other point to make on that is that it's not so much. I mean, the money is very important, but equally important, perhaps even more important. No matter how much military hardware, no matter how many troops you have, you've got to have the political will to use them.
Yes,
correct. And you have got to understand there is that political will. Otherwise, they will not be deterred by military strength, and that does not exist in my view. We hear talks of the coalition of the willing, which goes from, oh, we're going to deploy British troops on the front line, to no, we're not going to deploy. We're going to deploy a few to help train the Ukrainians. Things like that show signs of strong weakness, or probably a contradiction, strong weakness, but signs of weakness. And the point about Iran, I think Trump's absolutely right. Iran is rebuilding its ballistic missile capability, which directly threatens Israel and other countries in the region. And that needs to be strongly addressed, as Israel did in the past. And Trump has said he will support that rightly. And the second issue is the nuclear weapons program. I think there's some question about whether Iran is already starting to rebuild its virtually destroyed nuclear weapons program. If there are serious indications of that happening, then there should certainly also be the same kind of effect as happened last time in the 12-day war. In other words, a massive battering of Iran's nuclear program.